Hello again, YouTube. Today we are going to do a tech video on how to change a wheel bearing on a Chevy 1500 platform. So this would be the same for trucks, SUVs, and it's pretty close to the same on a lot of like front wheel drive stuff that have axles that go through the front hub. So I got my Tahoe in here and I just replaced this wheel bearing about 2 months ago and it's starting to make noise already. Luckily it's got a warranty on it, but I have to take it off before I can take it back to the parts store to get another one. So what I'm going to do today is go over the steps it takes to put a wheel bearing on an 04 Tahoe. But like I said, it's pretty similar to the same year trucks, vans, and other SUVs as well. So enjoy the video. Okay, so I've got the truck in the air, and the first thing that I want to do is look over all the suspension components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the wheel, wiggle it back and forth, up and down, and watch under the truck to see if anything else is moving aside from the play that I've got in the wheel bearing. Okay, so everything else looks good under the truck. I've recently replaced the lower ball joints and the pitman arm on the steering box. So what I noticed going down the road is I get a little bit of a growl out of this front wheel. And when you turn left and right and put pressure on and off this wheel, the tone changes. So what you're doing is you're actually side loading the bearing that's inside the hub, and that's why the noise changes. So that's a good telltale of if you have a bad hub or wheel bearing, whichever situation you have. So I'm going to go ahead and get the wheel off of this thing, and then I'll go through the steps of getting the hub out of this truck. Alright, I hope the lighting is okay for you guys. So the hub is located behind the brake rotor, so we have to remove the caliper, we have to remove the axle nut, and we have to remove the caliper bracket as well to get everything out of the way. And then this is your ABS sensor wire, which goes up and has a connector right behind the shock up on the frame. So what we have to do is we'll pull the caliper and caliper bracket, unplug our harness, get the axle nut off, and we'll pull the rotor out of the way, and then I will show you guys what's next. So both of those bolts are what holds the caliper and caliper bracket. It's what holds it onto the spindle. So they're 18 millimeter. Pull those off, and then we'll pull this back and we'll lay it up on top of the control arm. You never want to let this assembly hang from the brake hose. The brake hose is fragile, and if you stretch it or if it starts to pull apart inside, you're going to lose your brake pedal feel, and you can even crack this line and you'll have a brake fluid leak. We'll pull the rotor out of the way. And what we're left with is our hub assembly that is still attached to the axle. You can see it spinning. And the ABS sensor is also located in here. On the back side of our spindle, there's 3 15 millimeter bolts that we're going to have to pull out in order to remove the assembly from the knuckle. And we're also going to have to remove this axle nut. Okay, so our axle nut is a 36 millimeter nut. If you don't have a socket this big, you can rent these at AutoZone or Advanced Auto Parts. And the heat just kicked back on, so it's going to get a little noisy for a second. Alright, next thing we're going to do is unplug and unclip the ABS sensor so that it can hang out of the way, so when we're ready to pull this off, we can pull it through with it. Okay, the next step for me is going to be a little bit different because I have this drop spindle on here. I actually have a stud instead of a bolt in the top of this hub assembly. So I have a nut to take off up here where you guys will have another bolt on the back side. So I've got a bolt on each bottom corner and then a stud with a nut on it up top. I'll bust all those loose and then you'll see this hub assembly will just pull right off. That's what the 3 bolts will look like. They're a fine thread, 15 millimeter head. All right, so the next step is, this is rusted into the spindle a little bit. So I'm just gonna grab a hammer and tap on the back side of the flange and see if I can't start to wiggle it loose. If this doesn't work, get a bigger hammer. If that doesn't work, get an air hammer. I'm gonna grab my air hammer and see if I can't make quick work out of this. Alright, so as you can see, the old hub is still on the truck. I cannot get it out of the spindle. I don't know why. This truck was lowered about 3 years ago, and that's when this hub and spindle would have been put together, and it is rusted in there pretty solid. So what I'm going to do is run up to the shop, grab a big air hammer and a big hammer, and while I'm up there I'll get another hub that I can bring home and put on this truck, and we will continue to beat on this thing until we get it removed. Alright everyone, so I had to bring home the reinforcements, and I forgot to turn the camera back on, but basically I had to beat the hell out of this thing to get it to come loose, and you can see where I missed a couple times on the back side. We have a little bit of repair to do on the spindle, but the main thing is it's loose. And what I did is I threaded the bolts back into the hub a little bit, and then I was hammering on the end of the bolt, which is helpful because it lets you get on the back side of the hub and move around as you're trying to get it loose, but it can damage the end of the bolt head. So be careful with how many times you hit this, and be sure that you can still get a socket on the end of it when you're done. And that's it. That's the old one right there. So you can see where I had put a chisel in behind the hub to get it off here and here. I'm going to have to come in here and round this hole back out. And I'm going to come in here and try to smooth this out a little bit too. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but you can see how the inside's rusted, and it's a tight fit in here. So when you get rust, things get a little hard to take apart. But this is fine because it's still going to fit snug in this bore. Even though I beat up the outside edges some, it's still going to be a tight fit in here. And then if you look on this dust shield here, I beat it up pretty good. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut the bottom of this off, and I'm going to smooth the rest of it back out so that it fits flat, and we will go from there. Alright, so basically I cleaned up the flat outside surface, came in here with a little wire wheel, cleaned up some of the rust out of the outside, and flattened back down everything that I had beat up with the chisel and hammer. I'm going to go prep the new hub, and then we'll slide it on here and I'll show you how to put it back together. Alright, so here's the old versus the new. Worn out, new. I had to modify the dust shield a little bit because I beat the hell out of it with a hammer and an air hammer. So I just cut the bottom tab off because it was all mangled. We'll slide it back on there and we'll be good to go. Once we've got this sitting back on here, we need to go ahead and start our 3 bolts from the back side and get those snug, and then we'll make sure everything's in a line and we'll put the axle nut back on. Alright guys, we got the 3 bolts on the back of the spindle tight, and now what we're going to do is put the axle nut on, throw our rotor back on, and get our caliper and caliper bracket back on, and we're done. It always helps to have moral support. I meant oral support. Oral support. Builder that can't keep up. What I like to do to help me get the caliper and caliper bracket back on is I'll thread one of the lug nuts onto the stud to help keep the rotor in place while I try to slide the caliper back over the rotor. Like a beast. Alright, so here we are, all back together. All I have left to do is run my ABS wire back up the control arm to the back side of the shop and plug it in, put the wheel back on, and we are good to go. We'll drive it down the road and see what it sounds like. Alright guys, so that basically concludes the video. That's how you do a hub or wheel bearing assembly on a Chevy 1500 platform. Like I said, it's the same for front wheel drive cars. Normally it's a 3-bolt and then an axle bolt to go along with it. It's a pretty simple job. The hardest part is getting the old hub out of the spindle or the steering knuckle, whatever you have on your car. If you guys want to see more videos like this, be sure to comment below, and as always, give me a like, a thumbs up if you like this video, and merchandise coming soon. So pay attention around the first of the year. We're going to start doing hoodies and shirts with the High PSI TV logo and some different sayings on the back of them. Keep a lookout for that. As always, thanks for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.